it amplifies sound.
Hello.
Testing, 1, 2.
Is there? Yes. Yep.
And council members, since we're sitting back here, we get to speak as well.
I don't know about that. I think it's your discretion.
I did prepare anything. No, so I didn't know I had that, so I won't speak unless I
It's
have.
really about, we have about a half an hour presentation.
Hi Patty, I think we met before.
Good evening, everybody. Excuse me, I think we're going to get started, so if you want to grab a seat, that would be great. And I will walk you through our agenda for this evening. So we'll start with some quick introductions of some of us on staff and some of the city officials who are here. I'll give you a quick overview of what we're planning on talking about tonight. And then the majority of the time is really to listen to any questions you have, and hopefully we'll be able to answer those. So to start, I am Brian Steglitz. I'm the manager of water treatment services for the city of Ann Arbor. I've been with the city for over 20 years. And working with me tonight on this presentation is going to be Patty McCall with Tetra Tech. She is our hydrogeologist consultant who's helped put this presentation together. And Kayla Coleman will be helping facilitate to keep me on track and make sure that we're able to address all of the questions that come up. Also, staff that's here is Lisa Wandras is in the back. She's our communications director or manager. Craig Hupy, our public services area administrator. And we have an intern with systems planning who is over in the corner who is helping us get people signed in. Her name is Nani Wolf. We have several city council members here in the audience, so I'd like to welcome Councilmember Griswold, Councilmember Hayner, Councilmember Eaton, Councilmember Nelson, and Councilmember Lum. Did I miss anybody? Okay, well, thank you all for coming tonight. So why are we here? We're here because we want to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that the city's drinking water supply is protected. And that is really going to be the focus of our conversation tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about, as part of this introduction, what we mean by sentinel wells, because I think that's some jargon that people may not be familiar with. But if you keep that all in the context of the conversation tonight, is what does the city feel like we need to do to make sure that we are amply prepared to make sure our water supply is protected. And the water supply we're talking about, the Huron River water supply, our surface water supply in Barton Pond. So I'm going to pass it quickly over to Kayla to go through some of our rules for the evening.
Hello. So just to make sure that we can all get the most out of tonight's meeting, I wanted to get us started with some discussion guidelines. So I'm looking for a volunteer. Would anyone be willing to help us go through the proposed discussion guidelines here? Would someone read the first one? Volunteers?
Be recognized to talk. What happens if you disagree?
Okay, be recognized to talk. Thank you. And how about the second discussion guideline?
Speak loudly and clearly so everyone can hear.
Speak loudly and clearly so everyone can hear. Thank you, Councilmember Hayner.
And stand in front of it.
One speaker and 1 point at a time.
One speaker and 1 point at a time.
Allow everyone a chance to speak before a repeat speaker.
Thank you. And how about you back there?
Be respectful to other ideas and perspectives.
Okay. Be respectful to other ideas and perspectives. So my question for you all is, do these sound like fair discussion guidelines that we can work with tonight? Is there anything missing that we should add to the list? Yes.
Yes, something is seriously missing, and that is a spirit of actual change. A spirit that tells us we have, actually the city of Ann Arbor has miserably failed in protecting us and our waters are contaminated. The spirit of we want change, urgency to clean it up is missing.
Okay. Thank you, Moshkan. So that's the spirit of change and urgency to be added as well to the discussion guidelines. Is that agreeable? Okay.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you all, and I'll hand it back over to Brian.
Thank you, Kayla. A couple definitions to make sure that we're all on the same page as we go through this presentation tonight. I think you've all are familiar with this term 1,4-dioxane, but that is the groundwater contaminant that we're talking about. So when we talk about this Gelman plume, we're primarily talking about 1,4-dioxane. This was a solvent that was used as part of a manufacturing process over off Wagner Road on the Gelman site from the 1960s through the 1980s. The Gelman plume is where the concentrations of this industrial solvent have gotten into the city's groundwater, and we estimate that there's approximately 850,000 pounds of this dioxane that might have been used at the site and potentially gotten into the city's water system, groundwater, not into the city's water system. Gelman manufactured medical and environmental filters. So when we talk about Gelman plume, that's what we're talking about. Sentinel well. A sentinel well is a well that we are proposing to look at locations for installation where we don't expect dioxane to be. So it's a monitoring well. It's basically a sentinel well is synonymous with a monitoring well, but it's a well where we are not necessarily looking for finding the contaminant at this point in time, but it's strategically placed at a location where if we do detect the contaminant in that well, it can serve as an early warning system for the city to take additional action in order to protect its water supply. So a few things about what we won't be talking about tonight, since we are focusing solely on protection of the city's water supply in Barton Pond. The consent judgment. So this is part of ongoing litigation between several parties and the Gelman. We won't be discussing that, and that won't be on the agenda tonight. We also won't be talking about near-surface groundwater and basement sampling. We're aware that there is some evidence that some dioxane has reached near-surface water groundwater in the area of West Park. Again, not part of the agenda for this evening. The discussion about Superfund and EPA's potential involvement in the future associated with remediation of this site will also not be discussed, and impacts on Scioto Township. We recognize that these are all very important things that a lot of people are concerned about, but tonight we are going to be strictly focused on the city's water supply at Barton Pond. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Patty to walk through the technical part of the presentation.
All right. Oh, yes, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for attending tonight. I appreciate the audience. So just briefly, what we're going to talk about tonight, I'm going to give you a little bit of background information on the Gelman plume in general. The project phases that Tetra Tech completed for this model, our recommendations, and then Brian's going to come back up and do the last couple of slides about the next steps the city's looking at. Okay. Boy, this looks a lot different than it does on my computer. Let me grab my pointer real quick to point out a few things. So you may have all seen this, probably a lot of you have seen this figure. It's from the County Health Department. Just to orient you, this is the larger picture of where we're located. So Scioto Township to the west, Ann Arbor Township to the north, and then this sort of kind of a lavender color here is City of Ann Arbor. Let's step back a little bit. Here's 9414. I'm just trying to orient you. 94 heads south here. This is the former Gelman site here. A couple of things to point out here. This is the plume, right? This big thing here. The darker color in the center is what's depicted as everything above 85 parts per billion. And what's outside of it is everything that's been detected. So at least a detection of 1 part per billion of 1,4-dioxane. Also on here is this red dashed line, and the red dashed line is something called the prohibition zone. In, I believe, 2005, Ouachita County Circuit Court deemed this area to basically groundwater could not be used to limit the exposure to people who could potentially drink the 1,4-dioxane groundwater. Most importantly about our conversation tonight, here's Barton Pond. We are most interested, and for this model, what we did was we took a look at this black line here is everything that ended up in our model. And I'll talk about exactly what that model is and what we've included in it. But just a couple of other things about this figure, if you've not seen it before. These are all monitoring wells that the responsible party has installed. For the most part, there are a couple of residential wells in there as well. And then outside, these other dots that are around in the township area, those are residential wells. Okay. So our project phases, we're broke it down into 6 phases. They're not independent of each other. We've kind of been working on all of them at the same time. But quickly, I'll go through each of these in more detail, but just as an overview, phase 1 is the data collection phase, which we started in July. Actually, I think we may have started in June. We've kind of been gathering information from various sources. Then we started the actual 3-dimensional modeling. The third phase is an independent review that we had completed. Phase 4 is a sample collection phase. And then phase 5, well location recommendations, and finally, public engagement, what we're doing here tonight. Okay, so there's a lot on this slide, but this is essentially what we've gathered together to put into our model. So our model is a 3-dimensional rendering, essentially, of many variables to help us understand where we could put these sentinel wells that are going to protect the city's drinking water supply. And in order to figure this out, that black line that I had outlined here, we've included all the monitoring wells in this area. It looks a little sharp in places, and it's because each of these lines is connected to a monitoring well. So there are monitoring wells on the outside of this line. And then all of the wells, pretty much all of the wells that are inside are in our model. And the line is a little wrong in that we actually included one that heads out toward, I think it's Glendale Road. So it kind of pinches out, and you'll see that in the model. You'll see the pinch out in the model. So going back to this slide, so we were trying to determine what spatial parameters we wanted to include, and obviously the most important thing, me being a geologist, is geology. So we put in all of the geologists from those 67, I think, monitoring wells is what's in our model. In addition to that, we needed to make sure that we were understanding things correctly. So when you can't just throw geology into the model, you have to have things spatially arranged, right? So we need surface elevations, and we need to know where, a contact is, where sand starts, where clay starts. So all of that elevation data is included in the model. We also have the 1,4-dioxane concentration data from the most recent monitoring that was completed at each of these wells. It's not a time travel for each one of the wells, it's just one point in time. And then we did reach out to several people for more information, especially the elevation. The elevation data is really important. So we had a meeting with Roger Rail from CARD and SRSW to get some information from him. He's obviously got a wealth of information, as most of the people in this room know. He provided us some boring logs, some data. He also gave us his elevation data. We got elevation data from Dan Hamill with Eagle, and also Fleiss and Vanderbrink, who is the responsible party's consultant, provided us with their survey database. So we had 3 survey databases to compare to, and for the most part, things lined up. There were a few things that were a little odd, and we just had to figure out, what worked the best, and sometimes it was going back to surface topo. But more often than not, it was just that there were some data gaps, like maybe Roger didn't have some data, but Eagle had some data, so we were able to fill in those data gaps. Okay. So some information about the model itself. It is a three-dimensional deterministic model, and by deterministic I mean it is a snapshot in time. It's not a stochastic model, which you may have seen, which gives you some time travel into the future. You can understand what's happening maybe 10 years down the road. This is just a snapshot in that time, so we can take a look at some cross-sectional views, essentially. And I want to talk a little bit about kriging, because that's important to this model and to many models. Kriging is an interpolation process where you've given two endpoints, essentially, and maybe we don't have enough data in between to definitively say this sand layer continues 100 feet this direction. But the model will determine a weighted average, essentially, and come up with what it thinks will be in between those spaces. And that's important in this model for many reasons, and partly because the well network for the responsible party, especially to the north, there's big space. There's a lot of space in between. And that's part of the reason why we're not sure what's happening to the north, if water is traveling that direction. Sorry, Vince?
So does that take into account the glacial till with all these different strata?
Yeah.
So that curling
Kriging, yeah.
takes
Yeah.
into account that, that's what would happen.
Yeah, so what we did is we interpreted those boring logs into simplistic units: clay, silt, sand, gravel, and that actually might be the next slide. Hang on. Oh, one more slide. Okay, so a couple of constraints for this. I did talk a little bit about the kriging. So we've got the kriging that happens both with the geology and also with the 1,4-dioxane data itself. It will interpolate what that concentration could be in between those two spaces. And like I alluded to, we do have some large gaps in the physical space between that well monitoring networks. I mean, some places it's 1,500 feet, right? So many places it's closer, but once you start with bigger spaces like that, the model's trying to evaluate what that could be. And then also we don't have data to the north that could be integrated into the model. So we sort of have like this boundary that ends. Okay. Kayla, I'm probably going to need your help here. So before we start, this is like a minute video, and I'm probably going to rewind it and play it a couple of times because there's a lot of information to see in this. But what I first want to point out is that it's hard to distinguish these colors here, but the brown colors are clay and then silt. And then we've got these golden colors that are like sand and gravel and gravel. And what will happen is each one of these will start to come into the model independently. So if you want to start it. So you're looking at an aerial view. The top is the north side. Wagner Road is on your left. Those are all the monitoring wells that are included in the model. And then you'll start to see the clay come in. There's a lot of clay. And then the silt looks pretty massive. And then we add the sand in, sand and gravel. And you don't even see the gravel pop up because there's so little of it. You want to rewind that again, and maybe we'll just play it again. Yeah, there you go. So again, we're looking at Wagner Road on the left and that Glendale on the right. Sequoia is on the point. There's the clay, adding in the silt, sand and gravel. And again, you don't see the gravel. There's just a little bit of it. So those yellow areas are what we call granular. Those are areas where you can have groundwater flowing if you have groundwater in those areas. And then the brown areas are what we call cohesive. It's very difficult for water to move through those. So they operate as an aquitard. Water doesn't flow through them, so contaminants aren't likely to flow through them as well. Now we're getting into the contamination, the 1,4-dioxane plume itself. And we'll rewind it and play it again, but just to give you some information about, this is the scale for the contamination. So the blue is essentially a non-detect. And not until you get up to this yellow are we at like 10. The top is anything like 1,000 and over is what's red. So we'll play that again. I think it starts about 45 seconds, Kayla. Okay, so now we're looking at non-detect, everything including non-detect. Now we're looking at about 10 parts per billion, and everything above that. We're getting into about 100 parts per billion and everything above that. And now we're at about 1,000 as this winds down. I don't know if you can move it back just to like maybe 5 seconds. Maybe a little further. I just want to get to that last bit. Yeah, right there. That's good. So, yeah. There's a couple of places here, and probably many people in the audience here will know exactly what these wells are. But that's First Sister Lake down at the bottom there. Sorry, I don't have a pointer. There you go. So we've got a handful of wells that are in the model that are 750 parts per billion. We've got one that's 2,100 parts per billion. And I think there's another one that's right about 1,000 parts per billion. So that's what's causing the model to crig that data together. But you can see where those hot spots are. And they tend to line up in these granular areas, right? So that's what you would expect. But what I want to point out about this, if you want to run it again, Kayla, you can just run it from start to end, and I'll just talk through it. What I want to point out is that there is a lot of clay here, and that helps to guide the contamination in the groundwater a little bit. But what we don't know is those sand layers that start to pop in, those could be little, what we call like sand stringers, so you don't know. There might be like a regional or a small groundwater divide where water could follow a different pathway than what the preferential pathway is. So that's what we're concerned about, and that's why we're interested in making sure that Barton Pond is protected. We don't know if any of those sand stringers are out there and contamination is following that pathway. Vince?
Can you explain what the state standard is for cleanup for dioxide? I think it's at 7.2.
That is criteria. That's the generic cleanup criteria for drinking water protection, 7.2 parts per billion.
Geology types, the strata types, that all came from the cross-sectional well data, like we did do our own soil.
We did not. No, those are all. Yes, everything is from existing data. So we looked at soil boring logs that have already been completed by the responsible parties consultant and reinterpreted them.
What is responsible party?
Gelman,
So the polluter.
yeah, Gelman or Donaher is their name now. So
So the polluters.
Yep.
The Gelman's staff in Marble that they
Mhm.
that unit is purchased from the
Oh. Okay.
Just gonna note that this meeting is being recorded by CTN, and it will only pick up what is spoken into the microphones. So what comments are being made in the audience, if you could raise your hand if you have a comment, and we'll bring a microphone to you. Otherwise, those at home will not have the benefit of hearing your comments and questions. Thank you.
Can we pull the lights up real quick? Because I want to walk through these cross-sectional views. Hopefully people can see them on both sides. Okay. I don't know if these are positioned very well, but this is what we got. So here's our area again, our model space, essentially. There are 3 cross-sectional views across here, starting with A, B in the center, and then C down here on the south side. These are ordered the same, A, B, and C. And what you can see from these, we'll start with the geology, which is on the right. We have less sand, that's this golden color, on the north side than we do down here on the south side where we saw the highest contamination. These are depictions of the concentrations right? So that red was above 1,000. I think it was actually pulling in like 700 in that orange space. So we don't actually have contamination up here at the top of this. That's a model issue we've got to fix. But this should be brown up here, and it should look something a little more similar to this. So as you move from the north down to the south, you see that we're losing that higher contamination. It's getting sparser. I say higher relative to that high concentration of 2,100, right? We're looking at like 300 to 1,000 in this space on the north side. This is about 1,000, and here we're in the heart of it. Where did Kayla go? Thank you. Thanks, Kayla. Okay, so just to move on, now that was the quick preview of our model, essentially, or an understanding of it. I know there's a lot of information in that and a lot that went into making that. So we had Dr. Larry Lemke review it. He came to my office and sat with us, and many of you may be aware of who Dr. Lemke is. He's both a hydrogeologist and environmental engineer, and he's currently the chairperson for the Earth and Atmospheric Sciences Institute for Great Lake Research at Central Michigan University. He's been involved with the Gelman Plume for at least a decade and a half. He's graduated many of his students with masters and PhDs on the Gelman Plume, doing thesis on it. So we wanted him for his institutional knowledge, and he's a modeler, and he does a lot of stochastic modeling, and if you've met him, he's a great man, and he knows what he's talking about. So we thought he'd be the perfect person to take a look at it. So he gave us a couple of tips, some things he thought we might help strengthen the model. We took those into account, added them to the model, and I think we got a pretty good product. So phase 4 is our sample collection. We were not able to complete this. We chose several wells mainly along our model space boundary where there are no detections in those monitoring wells. We wanted to split samples with Gelman, and the reason we wanted to do that was because we wanted to use a different analytical method that would provide maybe some resolution to the data. Method 522 is a drinking water method. I know I use it on many sites myself. It can detect down to 0.7 parts per billion. The method that's used by the responsible party is 1 part per billion. So we were looking for that in-between space because we're talking about, maybe this plume spreading to the north. They're getting non-detects. Maybe there might be a little bit in there that might help us with the model. Unfortunately, we didn't have access to those, but that didn't have an impact on our ability to come up with our recommendations. So our well location recommendations, I just want to run through a few things that we have been talking about that are important for coming up with where we would put those wells. Obviously, geology is key. We're looking for those stray sand stringers that could potentially be carrying the contamination. Groundwater flow is very important. One thing that I didn't mention when I talked about the larger health department map is that groundwater flow from the Gelman site essentially heads to the north, and then it takes a turn to the east. We're wondering if there's a groundwater divide at that northern end where some of it, as I've alluded to, could potentially be heading to the north. We also took a look at surface topography. In the absence of having wells to the north and not having any geology to help us understand where aquifers are or where the clay is the thickest or where those sand units may be and contamination could be moving through, we look at surface topography as an expression of groundwater usually mimics it. And I'll show you a figure in a second here that kind of helped guide us to where those locations would be. So we basically look for highs and lows. And then the final thing related to the science of it is taking a look at the 1,4-dioxane concentrations in the existing wells and looking at trends and understanding where things are and where they've been, where they could be migrating to or where they are migrating to. Some other just, a little more political, I guess, looking in city right-of-ways or city property for installing monitoring well locations. And also I threw this last one in. I like the idea of having some adaptability. So if we first install one monitoring well, it would be nice to take that information, put it back into the model or do some other analyses on it before we figure out where that second one goes. Instead of like 1, 2, 3, 4, that's where we're putting them. We want some adaptability to understand what's happening in that first well to help inform the second well and then the third well. So these are our recommendations, and I'll show you the locations on the next slide. We are suggesting 3 or 4 nested monitoring well sets, and nested means that each of those monitoring wells would have what are called screens. They're basically independent wells within one borehole. And they basically seal off different aquifers within that one borehole. So it gives us some distribution in the aquifers that are in the subsurface. Survey data obviously is very important to us. That helps us understand groundwater flow. We recommend taking static water levels, obviously, understand how the head pressures of the waters are moving through the aquifers and understand which direction they're going. We would sample with the lower detection limit in those monitoring wells so we can see that resolution and get an even earlier warning. And probably most important after the wells are installed is doing some aquifer analysis, and that's something that I've seen a whole lot of for this Gelman Plume. I think it's important to understand, basically these aquifer analysis would tell you how quickly the water is moving, which direction it's moving, what gradient it's moving at, because sometimes it moves faster in some areas than it does in others. It would tell us a lot about the aquifers that they're moving through. Coarser material makes it easier for water to move through than it does the siltier material. It makes a difference for those time frames. So ultimately what we're interested in is how long, if we were to detect something, how long it would take for the contaminant to reach Barton Pond, and doing these aquifer analysis would give us that ability. Ooh, that's hard to see. So here's our recommended well locations. I just kind of isolated these orange areas as potential places to look. And I alluded to earlier about the surface elevations. So these brown lines through here are the high elevations in this area on the north side. They're all about 950 feet. This is our prohibition zone boundary right here on the north side. And then you can see we've got this open area here and then like a little channel that runs through these two 950s. This is where I would first target, like Maple Miller area. It seems like an easy way for the water to try to go through. Again, I'm using surface expression to understand what's happening in the groundwater, but until we put a point in there, we won't really know which direction the groundwater is moving. And then after that, I kind of stuck to that channel and then putting a couple of points out here. Again, that adaptability once one well is installed and learning some information about the aquifers and the geology will help inform second, third, and fourth. Now I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Patty. And we're getting close to opportunities for questions. Just a little bit about our public engagement approach. We felt it was really important, one, to engage the people who have expertise in this area. So we spent a fair bit of time with Roger Rail with CARD, and also Patty mentioned with Dr. Lemke. So we're tapping into their knowledge and experience. We've also been communicating regularly through our monthly water newsletter, qualitywatermatters.org. So as we've completed updates throughout the project since July, we've been providing updates through that channel. We've been giving council updates as well. So and obviously we're having this public meeting tonight. So we've really tried to engage people as much as we can, tap existing knowledge. We've also had some communications with Eagle to make sure that we have the information from them incorporated into the work that we're doing. and where are we taking it from here. So as we wrap up this effort, we will be identifying recommendations, and you've seen sort of what the preliminary first cut of those recommendations are, and we will be presenting those to City Council for their consideration. We know typically questions come up on what costs that we've incurred are. The work that we've spent with Tetra Tech has cost just under $30,000 to the city. And our estimated costs for implementing the well installation recommendations that were just shared with you, those 3 to 4 nested wells, is approximately $400,000. We will be bringing this to consideration, these recommendations to council, and the expectation is if we end up moving forward with this, we would be installing the wells somewhere in 2021 to 2022 timeframe. So with that, I would like to open it up to questions, and I think we're going to pass a microphone around so we can make sure people can hear.
So let me get the lights so we can all see each other better. And so that we can continue with an orderly fashion for our meeting, if I can see a show of hands of everybody who would like a chance to speak, and I'll pass out cards and then we can work through these in order. Some on this side of the room, and then we'll come back to the other side as well. Anyone else over here? Oh, you left a written comment? Okay, I'll come up to this side. Yep, there are written feedback forms as well, but we have plenty of time right now. 6 or 9? That's 6. Sorry about that. Yeah, 6. 7. Did you have your hand up? And Kathy, did you get a card already? You've got one. Was there someone else? No. There you go. Okay. Any other hand? You do. Okay. There you go. All right. So we've got our first 10 anyways, and then we can pass out more as we go. So if you could raise your hand, or whoever's got number 1, you'll turn that into me. I'll trade you for the microphone.
I understand that we're doing a lot of monitoring. How do you treat 1,4-dioxane to make it, quote, as safe as possible?
So from the perspective of treating the drinking water, there are treatment techniques that are available. They're called advanced oxidation. It's what Gelman is currently doing as part of their pump and treat operation. So it involves typically a process like ozone or UV in addition to a chemical oxidant like hydrogen peroxide. So at their facility, they're using a combination of ozone and hydrogen peroxide in order to remove the 1,4-dioxane.
Thank you, Brian. Number 2, here you go, Vince.
Thanks for doing the meeting tonight. Appreciate it. Roger Rail wanted me he's out of town. Roger Rail asked me to make sure that the data that's collected is incorporated into Eagle's database. There's, it's already a database that isn't fully complete, and we'd like to try and make sure that we have a complete database. The other thing I wanted to mention was that Larry Lemke actually got his PhD doing this site, and he is a very knowledgeable guy. Thank him for his work. But his comment at one of the meetings, for the card meeting, I'm a card member, Vince Caruso, board member, he said that once, in his opinion, once the Plume gets beyond M14, it's almost a downhill run into Barton. And he's very concerned about that, and we're very concerned about that. The MDEQ at a town hall meeting said, it was Bob Wagner, said, well, the Barton Pond has a natural blocking agent that keeps 1,4-dioxane from going into Barton. And I asked Larry Lemke at the next card meeting, which was a week later, and he said, no, that's not true. In fact, it'll go right into Barton if it gets close to it. And the card group had asked the DEQ to put some monitoring wells north near the prohibition zone many years ago. Judge Sheldon ruled that that was not needed. So how do those wells match up with the wells that you're proposing? If you even know about them, that's been many years.
Now, I remember that happening. I actually don't remember exactly where those wells were proposed. I didn't. No, we went right off of our model and all the other information that we gathered.
But I guess I would add to that, Patty, is that the intention of the work that we're proposing is to be able to answer some of those questions that you raised. Is there a migration pathway between where we see the existing contamination and our water supply? So we would hope to be answering those questions as part of this work.
I'm sorry, I came in a little late. Is the responsible party, as we say, sharing their data with you finally, or are they not? Or are they, and if so, how well?
So Gelman does share their data with Eagle, and that's available at the repository. So I'm not exactly sure which data you're referring to, but their concentration, their concentration data is available, on the repository. And I know CARD gets the data. I think Roger keeps that data available, and it's part of his mashups. Yeah.
So, hi, thank you, you guys. The phase 4 sample collection, it said that you weren't able to get those, and it's because Gelman wouldn't let you, or why do we not have access to, through Eagle and other methods, to have access to those?
So I think the issue that Gelman had is us doing the analysis that is more refining. They want to stick to the method that they use. So we only asked Gelman. We didn't, no. But it wasn't material to the end result for the recommendations. It just would have helped refine it.
And Patty, I think I'm correct if I say, if we're doing analytical testing on the new wells that we install, we will be using the lower detection limit for analytical techniques.
Yeah, absolutely.
And who has number 5? Kathy, thank you.
Couple questions. You stated that it is estimated that there were 850,000 pounds of dioxane put into the ground in different methods. Is that correct?
Yep.
Well, let me go on. Let me just. I wanted to know the source of your data, and then your estimation of how much dioxane remains in the ground at this time.
Okay, let me start with the 850,000 pounds. That's what went into the unlined lagoons between 66 and 86. The source of the data, most of it is what's publicly available from the sources that I mentioned. So we obviously got information from Roger, information from Eagle, and and then I was trying to think if we used any of the residential wells, but we decided not to. And then finally, our third was the actual responsible party. So we went to Gelman to get the elevation data because I wanted to know what they were using for their flow maps. And then your third question about how much mass is out there, I don't know. We only worked in that space, in that model space, so I have no idea, and we weren't estimating mass.
Number 6. That was you. There you go, Mushkan.
Thank you, Kayla. So, as far as I understood, in 2005, Gelman stopped treating the pollution or the plume with UV light. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So to this day, they are not using UV light to treat dioxin in the plume. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Because what you said before sort of sounded like they are using UV light. They are not using UV light. So the other thing I was thinking is, from what I have read for the past couple of years, which I have become aware of the severity of this, from what I've read, I can conclude that the data that the Department of Environmental Quality has and the data that the city has is quite incomplete, in that there is many missing data in that there are many wells that have never been tested, wells that had been put in place, and they had been in key positions, they have never been tested. Is that correct? My understanding of it, is it correct that there are wells that have never been tested?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, well, my understanding is that there has been wells that have never been tested. The other thing is, so you are telling us that in order to protect our waters, we need to put in more monitoring wells, and that would be a way of protecting us. So the way I see it, it's not a measure of putting more monitoring wells is not saving or protecting our waters. You are saying we should spend $400,000 to have more wells and to have more readings. I want everybody here to know that is not cleaning up. That is not cleaning up our waters. So I suggest, instead of spending more money, putting more wells in, and then have problems getting the data, fixing the data, blah, blah, let us try cleaning it up. It's 50 years since the city of Ann Arbor, various council members have known about this pollution, and it has not been cleaned up. As somebody told me earlier, money talks. Gelman has gotten away with murder. We must clean this up. It's not going to be a Superfund item. Superfund list is already being destroyed. So my question is, how is this going to help us? Spend another $400,000 for a few wells that is probably, gonna be we're going to be in the same position. Just pay more money to have more data with which you can do nothing.
Thank you. Brian, would you like to address the comment?
So the intention of this work, I think, as we've illustrated tonight, is to make sure that we have an early warning system for protecting our water supply. So the purpose of the wells are to make sure that we have wells in a strategic locations to make sure we know about the. Are you going to let me finish? The intention is to have wells in a place so we can make sure that we have an early warning system to protect our water supply. And right now, we feel like we don't have wells strategically located between where the north end of the Plume is and Barton Pond. So the intention here is to install those wells. Thank you.
Thank you. And number 7, Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks. As most of you know, I could talk about this forever, but I hope I don't have to talk about it forever. So I had a couple questions about the model. So when you created the model using the existing well data and the screen heights and all that incorporated a model in a way that we can view that and compare it like the Google Earth mashup is that Card and SIO uses? Is that model, is there an ability for that model with those cross-section lines and so on to be added to the ongoing Google Earth mashup that Card uses? And that's my main question.
Okay. Potentially. I have to work out, the IT aspect of it with Roger. But the data, is available in spreadsheets that can be provided to CARD. The model itself is its own program. So I'd have to figure out how that exactly works.
So when you created these three cross-section lines that we're seeing there that result in this data, my assumption is that you can slice that any way you want? Okay. And I guess my other concern would be one that'll probably come before our body, that when we looked at some other, we really want to take this project by the horns and deal with it. And so this idea that we're actually doing something I think is good, but when I ran my own numbers on that, it was not $400,000 for a set of nest, 3 sets of nest wells. It was much less than that. And maybe this is a different kind of well. Maybe we're doing something different. Hopefully that includes the analytical processes, but it just seemed like about 3 times more than what my initial estimates were for doing this.
Thank you, Councilmember Hayner. Number 8.
So first of all, I want to say how happy I am that you're working closely, I hope, with Roger Rail and with Dr. Lemke. I feel that DEQ Eagle has, for many years, discounted everything that they have tried to offer. So I'm pleased, if you are, in fact, using the very extensive data that they have. I'm disappointed that it's going to take more than 2 years to install the monitoring wells. That seems like a long time to get the job done. I mean, again, we're not cleaning anything up, but I would like to, if we're going to do monitoring, 2 years is an awfully long time. But my final question is about the soil borings. There was some reference to Gelman's consultant, Fleiss, and somebody or other. Have there been any new soil borings? When we say soil borings, are we talking about anything in the last 5 years? How?
So the soil borings I was referring to is what we used in the model space. And so there were some that were missing from like CARD's data set, and I had to reach out to other folks for them. What I primarily got from Fleiss and Vanderbrink was the elevation data, because it was most important for me to get that data from them because they make their groundwater flow maps from that data. So I wanted to see what they were using compared to what CARD has, what the state has, and there were some differences.
There haven't been any. It seems to me that new soil borings would be useful. Gelman did some years and years and years ago, but now we know much more. So, but we're just going by the old.
So I was in this model space, and so any of their newer wells would have been incorporated into this. And some of their newer wells are on the outside. I actually don't know what the newest one, where that one's located. Do you know, Vince, off the top of your head? No? Okay.
The newest ones are on the property in the swampy.
Well, I meant in the Plume. Yeah, in the Plume. Yeah.
There's been an issue all along about how thick the clay layers actually are and how much sand and all the rest. But we're not getting any new information about those layers by actually boring?
So no, we did not go out and do any boring. So that's really expensive. So we used existing data and reinterpreted for our model. We didn't just take what was on their bore logs. We used a simplification process because they refer to things, maybe how things got there, and dimictons and things like that. We simplified it to what's clay, what's silt, maybe, reinterpreted some of the information that was on the log.
So our plan as part of this first stage was to tap into all of the existing resources and data before we go and start poking holes in the ground. Because if we're going to poke holes in the ground to get more information, we want to make sure we're doing it in the place that we can leverage that data best to help answer the questions that we have. So really, using that information helped us decide here's where we really have significant data gaps that are important to know if we really want to understand how this plume is potentially migrating north of the prohibition zone. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but sort of. Okay.
And Priscilla's first question was a comment more about the disappointment in the time to complete the project. Sorry. Yes. Yes. Thank you for correcting that this was not the first comment that you made. But I just wanted to check whether Brian or Patty wanted to comment at all on the time frame for completion.
I mean, I can comment on that. I think, at this point in time, this is, our first cut, staff's first cut at looking at what we need to do and putting together, a realistic schedule. We know these things sometimes take longer than anticipated, but I think this would really be something that would go before council, and it could be their decision to identify what time frame they want to have this happen in, given capacity and funding source and lots of other questions that we would have to answer. So our intent was to provide the information to them in this fiscal year so they can consider for looking at how they might want to fund as part of future fiscal years.
And someone has number 9? Yes.
I guess to follow up in terms of what was just mentioned a moment ago, and maybe this is a question not much for staff and the consultant here, but perhaps for the policymakers when we're talking about the timeline. And I think everybody in the room is grateful that we're doing this, and we're moving. I'm sure you're moving as expeditiously as you can. I am assuming that this is not that this is not part of the consent agreement. Is that correct? I missed the first part of the
That is correct.
All right. Would council be looking at outside funding in terms of grants, et cetera, short of reopening the consent agreement itself and short of petitioning US EPA?
I can just answer that the direction that staff has received from the administrators that we would be pursuing opportunities for figuring out funding mechanisms, whether it is grants through the state or through potential future attempts to be compensated through the ongoing litigation. So yes, we will be pursuing opportunities, but at this point we haven't gotten to the point where we've identified what those are or made any decisions. We're really sort of early in the stages there.
My final comment would be thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for having the opportunity. I want to thank council for helping to make this happen. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And someone has card number 10. Okay, here you go, Monica.
I'm new to this. I live in the township, and this is Ann Arbor Township, I should say. And sure, I've read about it in the Observer, some wonderful articles. I'm going, oh my gosh. And Gelman, I mean, I drove by that area. That's my end of town. Now, this turns into a different situation, especially when you start talking about a monitoring well at Miller Maple. That's a mile from my house. I am now in the township with well water. Our neighborhood, which has been since the 60s, we live up on hills where the Huron River is below us. Because of putting wells in, I know there are sand areas. I live on a sand hill. It was the easiest part to put in a septic because we're full of sand. My question is, and also some of my neighbors, when we knew this meeting was going to happen, was that are there high-tech companies that we can use personally for our own wells, the safety of our wells, not waiting 2 years that you put in this monitoring well at Maple Miller? Why in the heck is this not being expedited? When people start knowing about this well, I mean, these are some folks that have been here a long time, that isn't going to sit well. And I know it's not sitting well for anybody else because this is our drinking water. And I know Barton Pond, of course, that's the Huron River, Barton Pond. So again, it's upsetting to me to hear you. I know you've been working, and administration is always slow. It's almost like in your own family. Well, you got to go through everybody before you make a decision in your own family. But the point is, again, I guess something mentioned this. I don't understand all this. There was a lot of words that just went over my head. But is there a way that can be expedited, get money, get grants? I mean, it happened in Rockford. There was that big article in Rockford, if many of you have read that, was in our paper. So the point is, there are people that can start expediting it and stop making just the wells and saying, oh, is it here now? Oh, well, why didn't we see that 2 years ago? We know it's going that direction. I guess.
Okay, thank you, Monica. Did Patty want to respond?
So there are many laboratories that will do this analysis for you. I'm happy to give you a list after. Oh yeah, the county. Yeah, you can reach out to the county. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. County Health Department. Let them know you want your well tested.
There are schedules to test wells all along the perimeter that the county health is on a schedule to test wells, and we are testing wells, but not we, but the county. Oh, sorry. So the county is testing wells. Like we regularly test the wells on, oh my goodness, Elizabeth is one where we're seeing trends in those wells below the drinking water criteria, but above zero. Yeah, and in Scio and several other places. So the county is testing personal wells, drinking water wells, and they have a testing schedule for that. And you can call and express your concern, and I've had others do that. I've referred them to folks on Rose Drive and Wagner Court and places like that. And they let them know when they're going to be tested, and they do it. And so there is testing available for private drinking water wells.
Monica, this map up here for everybody else where there's this like lavender color around these residential wells, these are regularly tested by the county health department.
Thank you. So I want to check and see if anyone who didn't have a chance to speak yet would like to speak, and then we can come back around to those who would like to speak again. So let me just pass out a few more cards. Claire, to Councilmember Griswold. Else who's not yet spoken that would like a chance? Nope, then I'll pass out. I know that Moshkan and Vince. Got everyone? Okay, so my number one. Not Monica, Claire, sorry.
This is my first meeting here, so this might be like an obvious question that everyone knows the answer to, but I was just wondering what happens when if and when the water gets to our drinking water to Barton Pond.
Well, that's a good question, Claire. Obviously, the intent of what we're trying to do here this evening is to make sure that we have these sentinel wells in place so we have ample time to be able to react if the water was going in that direction. And based on all the information that we have currently and through the limited work that our hydrogeologists have done, as well as information from Dr. Lemke, it's many, many, many years away in terms of where the plume currently sits, based on the best information we have right now. However, if for some reason this plume did enter our water supply, there are means of treating for it. We currently have ozone as part of one of the tools in our toolbox at our water treatment plant. And through some initial piloting that we did maybe 10 years ago, we know we can get some removal of 1,4-dioxane through the current treatment process, possibly up to 70% removal. If we needed to do additional treatment, then we would be planning to put in additional treatment as part of future capital plans. And that would be probably some type of additional chemical feed system. So it is possible, and our intention would be to be prepared for that ultimate situation if it eventually realized itself.
Thank you. Councilmember Griswold.
Hi, I've been on council for less than a year, but I want to say I'm really impressed with the knowledge of our staff, of our consultant, and most of all with the audience. It is just amazing how much people know about 1,4-dioxane. And what I've said before, and I'll say it again, we need a full court press. So what you're hearing about tonight is just one of the ways that we are addressing the 1,4-dioxane. We are still discussing it in the courts with our lawyers. We are still considering an EPA Superfund site, and I know we can't talk about those things tonight, but while we can't talk about them tonight, I am thinking about them every day, and it seems like there is this invisible headwind, and somehow we've got to break through because we've got the intelligence and we've got the passion, and I'm confident it's going to happen.
Thank you. Do you have number 4? We skipped 3. It was up front still. Thanks.
So I wanted to know, this is my first meeting also, and I don't know a whole lot about it. We are on the Maple Miller area, and I'm just curious if there's flume outside of the area that it's showing there. I mean, it seems like we would be testing a lot of wells that already exist before making new ones, and I don't know what people have chosen to have theirs be the tested well. I mean, and then is that a cost to a homeowner? We're in Scioto Township, but if we test our water and it's bad because we're kind of new to the area, who's gonna pay to have us hooked up to city water?
You want to answer that or not? So, you know, the county health department, as was already mentioned, in concert with Eagle, are testing residential homes that are in the vicinity, and if there are areas where they anticipate that there could be concentrations that wouldn't be acceptable from a public health standpoint, those homes are being tested, and if there were elevations of concentrations that were not acceptable, then you would be connected to the city water supply. At the expense of the polluter.
So it's a question about the process for how you would become connected at the expense of the polluter. Do we have that information?
So,
you would be doing that through your township. You'd be serviced by the township. You'd be a township customer. And for sewer also, if they're on, but again, they're with the township. They're not directly connecting to the city system. So I can't even speak if there's township sewer available, whether they're in the sewage area or not. So you have to go through your township government to ask that question, how they would manage it for you, because they buy service from us wholesale. You would not be a direct city customer.
Okay, does that give you at least the starting point? Yeah. Yeah.
It would be ultimately our water, but we're selling it to the township and they're reselling it to you. So you would be a customer of the township, you would have to do it. But how would I have Gelman's pay for the hookup? You would talk to the township.
So the conversation that just took place was about clarification on the connection process for a township resident. They will work through their township, and the township would then work with Gelman in turn. That's how the payment would be made.
Does anybody have more institutional knowledge on how that works, Vince?
So traditionally, there has been an issue with, especially people who are retired, getting their wells contaminated, and then they're switched over. Gelman typically pays for the switch for drinking water. Some of the SIO residents that I'm aware of had somewhat of a problem because they had to pay their own sewer. So they abandoned their wells, they abandoned their septic system that they paid for, and then they have to pay to have a sewer line run to their house. So there may be some negotiating there, but traditionally there isn't much leeway on the sewer as far as I know. So that's an additional expense these homeowners have to bear, which is, really unfortunate because they're harmless. I mean, they haven't done anything. And so that's been a bit of a problem for some people.
Thank you, Vince. And I think there was one more who had some.
Just let me jump in real quick. The area sewered within the township is smaller than the area that they have authorization to serve with drinking water. So it may occur that there is sewer already there, but as I said, the sewer corridor is pretty much the Jackson Road corridor and the adjacent developments. So again, I would urge you to talk to your township and see where their sewer is and where their water is. I can't speak to that.
How much?
Again, go through the county.
Just want to make sure your question was heard. So how much does it cost to have your water tested? And then the response was to work through the county for that. We didn't have the answer to that. But Kathy is here from SIO Township to answer some more questions.
I can partially answer your question. Okay, there is a SIO water service area and a sewer service area. There are approximately 2,500 residences that do receive water from the city of Ann Arbor. Okay, but it's billed through SIO Township, through the SIO Township Utility Department. there have been situations where there's identified dioxin contamination in drinking water wells on the edge of the known area, the Plume, and close to the city of Ann Arbor, where homes and neighborhoods are then annexed into the city of Ann Arbor. So there are two different ways this could work. It depends on where you live. But I think we have people sitting here, someone from the Evergreen subdivision and someone else who were annexed into the city of Ann Arbor. I know it's confusing.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you all for your contributions to clarify that. I think we're on number 5 now.
So basically, I want to, first of all, I want to say that I really appreciate your energy, Monica, the way that you brought the urgency of this to us. It's important. And I want to emphasize that. This is an urgent situation. We know that this plume has been growing for all the technology, for all the education, for all the positive stuff that Ms. Griswold talked to us about. With all of that, the plume is growing. It is going to every nook and cranny of our surface water, and there are some who believe it is already in Huron River, and there are some who believe it is already in Barton Pond. I've spoken to many, many people in this town, a lot of them with knowledge of water movement. I myself am an environmental toxicologist, and I have been following pollution all over the world in multiple scenarios. So what I am trying to communicate to the public here is this. Putting more monitoring wells is not a solution to the massive problem of dioxin contamination of our surface water. You can put monitoring wells up the wazoo. That is not the same as cleaning up the current catastrophic pollution that we face. We must clean it up. We cannot continue to use fancy science and fancy monitoring and let the pollution itself to keep growing. We must act to clean it up right now. In response to the young lady who's gone now, no, she's right there. What happens if it gets into Barton Pond? Dioxin is a carcinogen. It has been found in cord blood, which means it's very close to the fetus. It can wreck signaling of cells. It is a toxic compound. We are risking the future of young children when we act so, oh yeah, we've done a lot and we've cleaned up and we're in good shape. We are in terrible shape. We are in bad situation. Our waters are contaminated. Putting more monitoring well is not the same as cleaning up the pollution. Ann Arbor should clean it up. No more waiting. 30 years is enough.
Thank you, Moshkan. And Councilmember Hayner would like to speak to that.
Yeah, I'm a stalwart polluter pay guy, and yet we have had decades of not really getting the polluter to pay for much. I mean, they won't even split samples with us. And with all due respect to DEQ and the State Attorney General's office, we've had opportunity after opportunity slip by. They've allowed well abandonment without consulting the consenting, or not the consent, well, the parties who are part of this consent judgment now, the intervening parties. They don't ask us, but they allow DEQ and the State Attorney General's office allows wells to be abandoned just this last month, including compliance wells that are part of the consent judgment. And so as I learn more and more about this, I come to the unfortunate conclusion that we may indeed have to clean it up ourselves.
Thank you.
And I don't know if the public has a stomach for a millage to do that or what, but at a county meeting a couple years ago, the price tag of $30 to $50 million was put on this for total cleanup. And there's a $30 million fund that's set up by the polluter to facilitate DEQ's monitoring of and the monitoring of the prohibition zone and so on. And so there's 30 million sitting right there, and we spent 50 million on a parking structure downtown. And so the question, I don't want to judge the room or the residents by a small sampling, but there is consideration that we might ask a ballot initiative to clean this up ourselves. And so, you know, we'll see. Reach out to your council members and you know, share your opinions with us. If we don't clean it up and pull it back ourselves, we're going to be doing the same thing at the water treatment plant in the future, and it's very expensive. And the method, the UV method, which I think is a preferred method, is more expensive, and that's why Gelman stopped using it. It's a better method, but it costs more. And so I know that we're doing UV for some of our cryptosporidium, some other things at wastewater treatment and water treatment plant. And so, you know, we're going to have some experience with that in the next couple of years and see how that works. It's not the scaled one that would be required for dioxin, but we're going to know what it's all about. And the wastewater treatment, if Mr. Stiglitz can speak to this better, but the investment that we're putting into the plant improvements is designed in a manner to facilitate the cleanup of dioxin and other contaminants should it need be. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So we'll see what we can do. We want to help.
Thank you.
This time there's political will to help.
Thank you, Councilmember Hayner, for your comments. And Vince, I think, is our last card.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to make the point that Jeff was talking about. The discussion was $50 million in 10 years, and one of the commissioners on the county commission brought that up with several people, including myself, whether we could bond this out, and the county clearly had the money, he thought, and then we go with lawyers or with the EPA or whatever to get the money from Danaher, which is a huge company, you know, multi-billion dollars, like $26 billion company. And they're the responsible party. They can't walk away from this by federal law. That may change, but I doubt. I talked to Debbie Stabenow after Donald Trump was elected. She came to Ann Arbor area, and I asked her point blank, you know, is Superfund still viable if there's a responsible party? And she said, absolutely. She said Superfund is working on many Superfund sites where there's responsible party to cover the cost. And so I would like to see our community petition for a Superfund, as well as any other opportunities we might have. It's not a one-shot deal. We could do things like Kathy Griswold says, you know, all hands on deck. I'll just mention something that should get people's attention, that there is near surface groundwater contamination at West Park at 22 part per billion. And that number's going up pretty regularly here. It was 1,000 part per billion at Vets Park a couple of years ago, which is about 11 blocks upstream. So we're at 22 at West Park at the near surface. This could technically be percolating into people's basements either now or in the near future. And then when it gets into your basement and it's contaminated, it'll evaporate. And when it evaporates, you'll be exposed through inhalation, which is another exposure route that is of concern. And the DEQ, Eagle says they will consider that vapor intrusion, which is now part of Michigan law, where CARD was really responsible for getting the DEQ to include that. We made a lot of pressure. But I think we need to talk to our city council members, talk to our council, county commissioners. I think we're very close to getting a strong support in that regard. There's going to be a joint meeting in December. So I urge you to contact your representatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. And I do want to make sure that we get to questions that are about the Sentinel Monitoring Well project and try to stay focused on that. We appreciate all of the other comments that we've heard, but I'm going to stay focused on hearing from those that have not yet spoken and that have specific questions to tonight's topic.
I was not able to locate the Sentinel wells as you went through the presentation. Is this presentation going to be available online, and will it indicate where the Sentinel wells are proposed to be?
Yes, it will be available. And I had circled areas. There's not like a pinpoint area. So, yeah. I know the screen is totally different than my computer, sorry. I don't know. Yeah, sure. Here we go. All right, so this is, the first one is the Maple Miller area. And then just north of that, in the park. Oh, sorry, she's on it. Is that better? Okay. And then just north of M14, again, I was looking in these high areas. I'm trying to bound the 950 areas. Maple is down here. Yeah. Yep. So just on the east side. And then I don't have it's hard to tell. I don't have a road over there. It's just to the east.
There's a well now at Miller and Dexter Road, or there was a monitoring well behind the party store there, or next to the party store on Dexter.
Mm-hmm.
Could you repeat that into the microphone? What was the?
My recollection is that there is a monitoring well on the corner, on the southwest corner of Dexter, of Dexter and Maple, next to the party store there.
Okay, an existing monitoring well, Dexter and Maple. Okay. Yep.
I just want to reiterate that these locations are meant to be clean. They're meant to be sentinel wells, and also to do aquifer analysis, which is really important in understanding which direction contaminant may be flowing and how quickly it's moving, the groundwater is moving. So there's even though there's monitoring wells here that are part of the responsible parties, there's benefit to having these, besides that.
I think there was someone new that had a question. Hasn't spoken yet? No? Okay, other questions? You have a question that's particular to this project? Yes. To the Sentinel monitoring well. We just need to make sure we stay on topic. Thank you.
Sentinel monitoring wells are not going to be useful to us because they merely are going to report some levels. What we need is cleanup. We need cleanup right now. Because Mr. Vince talked about Superfund, I have to say a few sentences about that.
We are actually not talking about Superfund here tonight.
So,
that was
okay.
an item that was not.
He should not have said. So let me give him two sentences. So Superfund list is being dismantled by EPA of Trump administration. It is false to make the public believe that putting this site on EPA Superfund site is going to eventually help us clean it up. It's false.
Are there any other comments or questions that are pertaining to the topics we're discussing tonight? Vince, is this pertaining to a topic that we are discussing tonight? Thank you.
So the new wells you're installing, I'm curious to note if you're going to screen them at high, close to the surface, as well as down deep, because that's a concern that we've had recently, that there's contamination that's migrating to the surface, and it'd be good to have a handle of if that's happening at these well sites, since you can screen it at several different levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the goal is definitely to screen it at several different levels. Whether or not it's going to be at the surface, we have to wait and see what the geology looks like and where the aquifers are. But yeah, definitely that's on the table.
Well, that's all that we had for you tonight. Thank you for coming. Anything, Kayla, to wrap up for the evening? Thank you all for your questions. We really appreciate it.
I will say, just a reminder, if you have written any feedback on your comment cards, please drop those off. There's a little box on the counter, or you could drop it on either of the sign-in tables. You also received a demographic questionnaire. If you did not yet complete that, please do. It helps us get a better understanding of who's participating at our public meetings and who's not, so we can get more diverse engagement. Thank you.
Have a good evening, everybody.